In this video, we're going to talk about the coelom, which is a body cavity. Some animals have one body cavity, some animals have multiple body cavities, and some animals do not have a body cavity at all. So the word coelom means internal body cavity, and I know that's a weird spelled word, but it is pronounced like coelom. And the coelom is only going to be in our triploblasts. So remember the diploblasts have two germ layers, and they are not going to have a coelom. So the presence or absence of a coelom happens with triploblast. And triploblasts may be acoelomates. A means without a coelom. So no coelom or without coelom. They can be coelomates, also called eucoelomates, which means that they have a true coelom. Or they may be pseudocoelomates, meaning that they have kind of a pseudo or false body cavity. So first taking a look at our acoelomates, and so these are organisms that do not have a body cavity, and that's being shown in this picture right here. The mesoderm layer is solid, and so you can see that in this kind of red layer here. So this is a solid layer. There is no space in this layer. And an example of an organism that is acoelomate would be Platyhelminthes, which makes up our flatworms. So you might be most familiar with a tapeworm, shown in this picture here. And so these are organisms that do not have an internal body cavity to them. The coelomates, which are also called eucoelomates, have a true coelom. And an example, so here I've got this annelid, which would be like an earthworm. There's one example. But as humans, we also fit into this category here. And that's being shown in this picture here. And so essentially, encased in this mesoderm layer, this red layer here, there are these spaces. And in humans, these spaces that we have would be things like the ventral cavity, which is where we would find our heart and lungs. And then you have an abdominal cavity, which is where you find most of your digestive organs. And so you have these kind of internal spaces where the organs live. So remember that these spaces are produced by the mesoderm. So you can see that it's surrounded by this red mesoderm layer. It is fluid filled, and it's lined with epithelial tissue, which is similar to the tissue that's found in our skin. And we'll talk more about epithelial tissue in a later lesson. So continuing our discussion on coelomates. So the coelom, this space, is located between the body wall and internal organs. So I'm going to attempt to draw a human real quick. It won't be a good human. I am a biologist, not an artist. All right, so pretend like this is a human. And in this human, we have a ventral cavity. And we have an abdominal cavity. And these are just two of the body cavities we have. We actually have more of this. We actually have more body cavities than just these two, but just kind of focusing on these two. So we basically have these spaces in our body that formed from the coelom. And inside the ventral cavity, we would have the heart and the lungs on either side of the heart. In the abdominal cavity, we have the stomach and the intestines kind of running through there. And the advantages of having these kind of fluid-filled spaces inside our body is that it helps to cushion and protect, so shock absorption, so it helps to protect our internal organs. The organs can also move around and grow as needed. And this is probably most noticeable when a woman is pregnant. So when a woman is pregnant, her uterus grows to like 5 times its normal size. And in doing so, it's pushing all the other abdominal organs up and away to make room for the uterus and the developing fetus. And so the organs have a little bit of flexibility as to where they can go because we have these fluid filled spaces. It also allows for increased movement and flexibility. So we can bend over without having to worry about rupturing our liver because the liver has a little bit of space that it can move and kind of accommodate us doing that. So I've been mostly talking about humans because you are a human, and so you're probably more familiar with these body cavities and structures. But it's not just humans that are coelomates. So we also have things like annelids, which would be our earthworms, mollusks, which are things like snails, arthropods, which are things like insects, echinoderms, which are things like sea stars and urchins, and then chordates, which includes humans and other mammals, reptiles, amphibians, etc., etc. And then the third level of having a coelom or not, and the third level of having a coelom would be a pseudo-coelomate, and pseudo means false. And so these are organisms, this is being shown here in this third part of the picture, where they do have a space, all right? So this green part is the pseudocoelom. So this is a space, it's a cavity. But the main difference is that the cavity is lined on one side by mesoderm tissue, but lined on the other side by endoderm. Whereas in the true coelomates here in the middle, notice that the space is entirely encased within the mesoderm. So that's kind of the big difference there, is kind of where this space is. And an example of an organism that is a pseudo-coelomate would be roundworms, which are also known as nematodes.